The Tears of God. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This book continues the story of the Arab sugar daddy and the beautiful Indian girl, and the story of the Indian child bride and the old Arab husband, and the story of the Indian Miss World and the rage of Muslims of the world, and also the story of Christina and the complete Jew. They have been written in English and translated into Arabic by the author Dr. Ahmed. This tale resonates with genuine love, strong resilience, and steadfast courage. I invite you to accompany me as I narrate the adventures of the extremely beautiful Indian girl, Aphrodite Khan, and her handsome American lover, Michael Lewinsky, in the Muslim world. Before we dive in the tapestry of the story, I would like to remind the reader this novel is narrated in 6 books. Book 1, The Arab Sugar Daddy and the Beautiful Indian Girl. Book 2, The Indian Child Bride and the Old Arab Husband. Book 3, The Indian Miss World and the Rage of Muslims of the World. Book 4, Christina and the Complete Jew. Book 5, The Tears of God, Jews, Blacks, and Muslim Women. And Book 6, The Hidden Life of the Prophet Muhammad. This is an intriguing epic story which exhibits resilience, love, and sacrifice. Book 5. Researching the social life of the Muslim woman in the Islamic world. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief passages from a review for printing in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. All characters in this novel are fictional, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is merely coincidental. Chapter 47. The Cruelty of the Nurse of South of Sudan. For the second time on the following day, Michael has been kicked in the back and jolted out of his deep slumber. The previous night, he either fainted due to the torture of the mosquitoes and other leeches, or fatigue had overcome him and caused him to fall comatose in an ontological state, just like that of an animal in its winter hibernation. He had desperately tried to free his hands and legs from the strong ropes and go and rescue Christina, but he could not. He tried to roll his body back to the camp, but he was prevented by the many stones, holes, and thorns. He wept bitterly for his inability to reach his beloved wife and rescue her. He thought that her circumstances were far more miserable situation than his. When everything did not work, he just continued to weep, pray, and ask God to protect his wife. He remained in that situation until finally toward the dawn he fell asleep, delirious. He was neither sleeping nor unconscious, but he fell into a long coma. Even a hibernating animal would be in a better physical state than his. This time, the person who kicked him is wearing military boots. His powerful kick could bring a dead body back to life. He is dressed up in a dirty uniform as a soldier. He is carrying an AK-47 Kalashnikov in his hands. He looks serious and angry. Michael was shocked when the soldier spoke to him in an American accent with perfect English. It is even African American English. He ordered him to stand on his feet. Michael is surprised when he finds his hands and feet are free of those ropes. He thought he was either hallucinating and seeing things that were not real or experiencing a horrific nightmare. However, the angry soldier grabbed his hands, pulled him, and dragged him like an animal until he forced him on his feet. Michael stood on his feet and looked around him. He saw all those unclothed, black-skinned savages who captured and brought them over there, tied with ropes, and made to kneel on their knees. Without clothes, they appeared as wild beasts rather than human beings. He could not see Christina among them. He is worried about his beloved wife. He tried to communicate with the soldier who woke him up, but he did not see him within his reach. He saw at least other 10 soldiers in their uniforms and carrying their assault rifles. His mind began to grasp what was going on. Those soldiers, he thought, had raided the camp of those captured jungle savages while they were sleeping in their small huts. He reasoned out, somehow those soldiers learned that 2 foreigners had been abducted, and a rescue mission had been ordered by their top military leaders. Michael wished in his heart his supposition was correct, the other options being too difficult to accept. He clung to the wish for the briefest moment before he must discard even that. He saw the guy who kicked him with his heavy boot, spoke to him in African-American English, and forced him to stand on his feet. He then opened fire on those unarmed jungle savages, and the other soldiers joined him. In cold blood, all those people have been fired at in their heads and chests and killed. They are young and old, men and women, and little children. Michael closed his eyes and began to weep. He is not weeping for the fear of death, but for the epic brutality he is an unwilling witness to. He knew that every human being was born a sinner, and lived a sinful life, and God said his heart was desperately wicked, but he never expected that human beings could harbor such evil. He saw evil, smelled evil, and felt evil as a creature that was engulfing his body, and about to swallow him up like a small grain of wheat. His fear of death left his heart, and he prayed to God to kill him too, and rid him of his evil generation. Even the ISIS Muslim terrorists had not gone down to that level of brutality by murdering non-combatant children and women in cold blood en masse. The Muslim terrorists took their victims as war captives and raped some and sold some as female slaves. To say the least, they saved their lives because they were children and women. Those African military soldiers also did not bother to bury the bodies of their brutally killed victims. They just left their dead bodies lying in the open to be eaten by the wild beasts and ravenous vultures. At least, ISIS Muslim terrorists buried their victims. Sometimes, the Muslim terrorists buried their victims alive in mass graves. Then the evil soldiers searched the small huts of their victims, took what they wanted to take, and forced Michael to follow them. He tried to resist, but they beat him, and dragged him along anyway. They did not go for a far distance until the captive American husband spotted his beloved Indian wife sitting on top of a huge military truck guarded by an armed soldier. He offered a prayer of thanksgiving to the Lord for keeping Christina alive. The soldier, who woke him up, came and told him to climb on the truck and sit near his girlfriend. Michael followed the order and jumped up in a second. He threw his arms around his beloved wife and embraced her, and began to weep again. This time, he has shed tears of joy. Christina responded by hugging her lover so passionately as the little child, who has found her mother, after she had been forcibly separated from her. After that human massacre and loot, all the soldiers climbed into the truck and surrounded Michael and his wife. Then the truck began to move. The American lovers are too afraid to talk. They do not know whether they are prisoners or rescued victims. The unfriendly attitudes of those southern Sudanese soldiers up to this point have done nothing to calm their fears. The soldiers conversed in their mother tongue, which sounded like people fighting rather than having normal social conversations. Michael is tempted to speak to the soldier who spoke to him in English, but he decides that restraint is the better part of valor. He decided to wait until the right opportunity arose. One of the soldiers pointed his hand toward Christina, and then moved it flatly over his mouth, and made a loud kissing sound. He spoke some words in his language which made the others laugh. Christina understood the gesture of the soldier, and huddled closer to her husband, as if she discovered a cobra not far from her. Her response made the English-speaking soldier intervene, and explain what his colleague meant and spoke. "The comrade Domak Get Nile likes your girlfriend," laughingly said the soldier. "He said she is as sweet as a mango and as beautiful as a full moon." Michael knew the explanation was directed at him, but he decided to ignore it. He does not want to challenge Domak Get Nile or praise him for his comments. Then Domak Get Nile stood up and hit his buttocks, and said something which led all of them to scream in unison laughter. The English-speaking soldier spoke again, translating, "The comrade Domak says your woman has a very big butt." Michael cannot control his feelings this time. He understood what those remarks were meant to convey. He said angrily, "It is none of his business, and it isn't funny." "Are you an American man?" asked the English-speaking soldier. "Yes, I am, and my wife too. I lived 10 years in America. I went there as a resettled displaced refugee." Michael preferred not to indulge those African soldiers in any friendly talk until he could figure out their intentions. "You guys made me clean up your toilets, although I had earned a university degree from the University of New Delhi in India. That is why I returned to my country and became a soldier. We are warriors in our country, and you make us your servants when we come to you for help." "I am sorry to hear that, sir. I agree with you that you had been treated unfairly in the States. Despite that, I don't hate America and Americans. They are still gracious people to us by offering us shelter in a time of need. I, sir, can see that you are a good man. May I ask you a question?" "Yes, you can. How did you know about us, and you guys had come for our rescue?" The soldier laughed before he responded to the question. "We didn't come for your rescue. We did not know even you guys had been kidnapped by those fucking Dinka people. We just came to kill them and happened to find you with them. It was a mere coincidence." "Why did you kill them?" "Because all Dinka people are our enemies, and we hate them. If we don't kill them, they kill us instead." Michael began to connect the dots. He heard about the recently erupted civil war between the Dinka tribes and the newer tribes in the south of Sudan. He understood that the guy he was talking to be a leader of a newer group. He preferred not to offer a judgment, seeing as there is no benefit to it. "We are neither Dinkas nor Nuers, but circumstances forced us to escape from a jail in the north of Sudan and come to your country to seek help. Why have we held prisoners by you? Your fate must be decided by our newer chieftains. We were told if you meet Dinkas you must kill them, and if you meet foreigners you have to hold them captives." The American couple's riddle has been solved through those few words. They became captives by chance. Their collective fates will be decided by a newer chief. Logically, they are now heading for a newer town, and there they will meet people who are relatively more civil than the savages from whom they have just gotten rescued. Michael wondered where the freedom, human rights, democracy, secularism, equality of women and men, equal treatment of people regardless of the ethnic backgrounds, that they had been promised to find them in the newly founded Democratic Republic of South Sudan. So far, they have seen nothing except evil to a degree they had never seen anywhere else. He tried to convince himself that they may see all those beautiful promises shining like lights in the big cities of the newest African country.
Chapter 48. The African Jungle Sex Style. The newer truck continued to run along the unpaved road for what seemed like forever. The fatigue of last night due to lack of proper sleep and physical torture overtook the American couple, and they drifted off to sleep. Before the monotony overtook them, Michael and Christina had been offered some food and water by the English-speaking soldier. The American husband remained alert for a long time after Christina drifted off to sleep on his lap. A nagging worry that the newer soldier who made some sexual comments about Christina may try to approach the beautiful Indian wife dogged her American husband, even when sleep finally claimed him. Their brief respite did not last, interrupted by powerful gunshots. Looking around, the two American lovers are met with images of soldiers firing bursts of automatic fire into the air. At first, they assumed hostile forces were hidden in a nearby stand of trees. But oddly, every soldier seemed to be shooting aimlessly into the sky, nor were they concentrating their fire on a specific target or aircraft. Then they heard a few of the soldiers begin to laugh and scream in inexpressible delight. It is the educated newer soldier who barked orders which are followed with an immediate ceasefire. Michael is curious enough to ask his former American fellow citizen to explain the reason behind the shooting at will incident. There are no enemies or ambushes, but Domak Gat Nile has opened fire, encouraging his comrades to concentrate their fire on the clump of tall trees, positively identifying Dinka soldiers, and as dictated by their shoot first, ask questions later policy, his comrades joined in the fray. Michael also has been told that the newer comrade Domak Gat Nile detests the Dinkas with bitterness because they had recently raided his village and killed his father, mother, brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, aunties, grandfathers, grandmothers, and all their children. They had killed everyone in the village, including the domestic animals. Their cows, however, were spared but were stolen. Likewise, some young newer girls were either raped to death or kidnapped as female sex slaves. Michael now understood the serious mental issues of the newer comrade, and inwardly he wondered if he had ever heard about the saving grace of Christ who taught his disciples, "Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." Quoting the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. The truck resumed its endless journey in the early morning hours. They continued to bounce up and down along the rough road right up until the evening. Occasionally, the engine would stall and the truck would grind to a halt. At this point, the soldiers would have to push the start of the slow beast again. Very often, the truck got thirsty and they had to stop and give it water as if it were a human being or a real wild beast. By now, it is clear that traveling by pack mules would have been faster, with them covering far more distance in relative comfort. Many times, Domak Gat Nile's eyes would glaze over when he remembered his lost family and his decimated village. After which he would inevitably open fire on some imaginary group of Dinkas and lead other comrades to join his deadly assault. Each time they opened fire, it terrified the captive American couple. Only madmen, people on drugs, or those demon-possessed would continually shoot at random objects, wasting ammunition. The crazy newer soldier is like Don Quixote who fought the windmills. Michael has a feeling that the angry comrade does not just imagine the trees to be people, but, in his mind, he actually sees tall, sullen Dinkas. Whenever he fell into that psychotic episode, he would begin shooting regardless of what anyone else was doing. Before long, a few of his colleagues would join him for fun or to soothe their hatred for their Dinka enemies. Finally, the educated soldier has no choice but to pass the order to cease and desist. No one is allowed to join the crazy comrade when he has one of these psychotic episodes. The leader is concerned about conserving munitions should there be an ambush or a protracted engagement with the real enemy. In either case, it is a major breach of protocol. Comrade Domak is now the boy who shouted wolf.
Whenever he opened fire, no one bothered to look at him or mimic his action. After the sunset, the newer fighters broke their journey. All of them, including their university-educated leader and Domak Gat Nile, soon drifted into a dreamless and deep sleep. None had slept during the long trip, and Michael and Christina remained awake and conversing for a long time after the soldiers went to sleep. They cannot run away as their feet are in fetters. Moreover, they are surrounded by the newer soldiers in every direction. Michael told Christina to sleep while he kept watching. He does not fully trust his southern Sudanese companions. He is worried that his beautiful Indian wife, being the only female for miles around, may become victim to sex companionship-starved soldiers due to the absence of their wives or girlfriends, or even African female soldiers. There is not one single female soldier with them. Not long after many fell asleep, Michael noticed unusual movement inside the truck. He saw a newer soldier getting up from his bunk and begin walking slowly and tentatively. Michael has no doubts that the soldier has feigned sleep just so he can move about on the sly. He must be up to no good in his mind. He may try to approach the lovely and sexy Indian wife thinking her American husband is asleep. but the soldier passed them without touching the sleeping Christina. Puzzled and pretending to be asleep, Michael realized the cunning soldier had other ideas. He started to make sense of the matter. Maybe he is trying to steal something from his fellow soldiers, or even do great harm to someone. Michael continued to observe the movements of the newer man until he saw him reach the other end of the truck. No one is aware of his movement. The leader of those newer soldiers has not kept a single soldier to guard his group while everyone is sleeping. Finally, the soldier is observed by the American husband gently seated himself down close to another sleeping soldier, touching him, almost tenderly. Roused from his sleep, the other soldier neither screamed nor fought back against that man who came so close to him, and tried to rob him of his money. Instead of crying or resisting, the second soldier began to return the touches of the first soldier. Michael could not believe his eyes when he saw the two male soldiers begin to touch each other's private parts, just like gay lovers do. Before he could digest the scene, the male lovers loosened their clothes and began to indulge in sexual activity. At first, the American man thought that they were truly African gay people, but when he saw one lying on top of the other, he doubted his conclusion. Michael has become exceedingly mystified. The one below is lying on his back, and the other man on top of his stomach. Now Michael began to hear their sexual exploits, as if they were right there beside him. While the American husband is racking his brains trying to figure out how two men could practice sexual intercourse in that way, a similar scene unfolded near his Indian wife. First, Michael thought someone sitting near them has jumped on Christina, and closed her mouth, and began to rape her near her American man. But then he saw he was doing that with another soldier. Yet another newer soldier, between the two couplings, two soldiers and his Indian wife, started to rouse from his sleep. This current activity took him by astonishment, because he did not see the second couple slinking in from anywhere. The two soldiers are sitting near each other from the get-go, and the plan is to indulge their sex whims once everyone is asleep. They are doing in the same classical missionary sex style, one down lying on his back, and the other on top of him. Michael does not know what to do. Should he awaken the educated leader and make him aware of what his shameless soldiers are doing? Or should he awaken his better half Christina, and ask her to help him translate into human language what is going on inside the military truck? Yet, another two newer soldiers began to partake in what seemed like a perfectly acceptable after-hours distraction. The sexual exploits are no longer furtive and secretive encounters between two discreet male lovers. 5 couples are at it, and even some are talking to each other while in the midst of feeding their lust. The ones on top are not only satisfied by inserting their erected penises in the rectums of their male lovers, but they are sucking their lips and licking their tongues too. They seem to enjoy anal sex more than if they are fucking their girlfriends in their pussies. The truck suddenly became so noisy that even Christina had inadvertently been prodded out of her sleep. Michael immediately protected her by placing his right hand over her eyes and told her to keep them shut and resist sneaking a look around, whispering urgent orders with bated breath, explaining the sodomy goings-on in the truck. With no reason to doubt her husband, she kills the urge to look at the scene her husband has painted in her mind. Why don't those African gay people just jump off the tailgate and indulge themselves under the trees in comfort? By then the American couple was completely hemmed in by 7 rutting sex couples. They cannot move a limb, now that the truck has become like a big bed in a brothel house with 14 people in an orgiastic sex frenzy, excluding them. It truly has turned into a disgusting, filthy, and immoral brothel, an unscrupulous tavern nest. When the shoveling and kicking of the sexual activities became too much for the American couple to tolerate, Michael shouted to the educated leader and woke him up. He told him that his fighting soldiers were engaged in disgraceful sodomy. That said, he requested him to ask those shameless gay people to stop it or go down and hide behind the trees and have sex. Otherwise, he is requested should release the American husband and his Indian wife, and allow them to go and step out of the truck until those improper sex activities are over. The leader laughed loudly before telling Michael that those newer soldiers are men and women making love to each other. He added quickly, "They are like them boyfriends and girlfriends having sex." Then he laughed even louder before he said to Michael, "You can also fuck your lovely girlfriend and enjoy your time together. I assure you guys, no one will stop you if you want to have car backseat sex, or you can call it jungle sex like that of the wild beasts do it in the open air. So go ahead and fuck your girlfriend and join the fun of the orgy." The two American lovers were astonished when they heard such an unbelievable report. The educated Nua leader is right, there are 7 female soldiers in that group of newer fighters, but for the American couple, all of them look like men. It took Michael and Christina a long time to believe what they had heard. More than 7 couples are behaving like animals, engaging in the natural act of mating or copulation. They had been with them throughout the day, and they did not see a single female among them. All of them are males and look exactly the same from the outside. Where have the 7 females come from? Unless some of them have mysteriously transformed into females, this riddle made no sense to the American boyfriend and his Indian girlfriend. They have the same short hairs on their heads which look like raisins. There are no apparent breasts or big buttocks to indicate that some are females and others are males. They have the same small eyes and big mouths and lips. There is no hint of beauty or any female attraction in any one of them, in the traditional sense or Bollywood criteria of beauty. They just look alike like Chinese or Japanese. The women in the north of Sudan look different from their men even if they were without their abayas and hijabs. But those newer females have nothing to distinguish them from their men until may become fully naked like those jungle savages they met on the previous day. Notwithstanding, their sexual activities show that they are mating as males and females. The copulations lasted for a little more than half an hour, and then every partner either returned to his place or fell asleep in the same place. It is another riddle for the American couple that they could not solve, that as soon as every couple finished their mating, they simultaneously fell asleep instantly. As if those soldiers answered the call of nature together and retired again to their deep sleep as if nothing happened. The American couple decided to wait for the morning so that they could either confirm or refute the assertion of the educated Nua leader. Only the crazy comrade who has the difficult name of Domak Gat Nile and the English-speaking soldier seemed to be uninterested in sex. At last, even Michael joined his wife Christina and fell asleep beside her. Chapter 49. The brutality of the Dinka of South of Sudan. It was still dark before dawn began when Domak Gat Nile reopened the fire and began shouting Dinka, Dinka, Dinka. Almost all of them heard him raise the alarm, but no one bothered to look or move in response. In the heat of equatorial South Sudan, the soldiers are sleeping like hibernating animals in the Canadian Arctic. The American couple also heard the commotion, but assumed that the idiot Don Quixote was going through one of his psychotic fits. No one bothered to look, being conscious just long enough to confirm that the voice belonged to their hallucination-prone friend, before sliding back into a welcome sleep. When the actual Dinkas encroached, no one responded because they accommodated his mental tirades and hallucinations, quickly dismissing his alarm. The moral story of the boy who shouted wolf teaches us that liars are often rewarded as such. Even if they tell the truth, no one believes them. Therefore, the first one shot and killed is the newer comrade Domak Gat Nile himself. His hit body crumpled and tumbled between Michael and Christina, and woke them up in panic and terror. When they looked around, they saw the Dinka soldiers already clambering over the truck. The Dinka are the tallest people on earth. Before the Dinka man's left leg has left the ground, his right leg has already reached the truck bed. 85% of a Dinka man's height is on his long feet. When you see Dinka men walking, you may mistake them for stilt walkers in a parade. Moving quickly and silently, they stood over their newer foes and using their guns as clubs, struck the sleeping soldiers to wake them up. The Nuers can do nothing except surrender themselves to the mercy of their bitter enemies. Instead of ordering them to get down, the Dinkas pushed each one off the truck. Some of them landed badly on their backs and some broke their legs or hands. At ground level, they are greeted by more than 30 angry Dinka soldiers. The American couple's fetters saved them from the harsh treatment. Those fetters spoke on their behalf, and are a silent testimony to their position as prisoners of the enemy. Therefore they are released and ordered to get down. It seemed that the Dinkas were more educated than their newer enemies. At least 6 of them can communicate in English. They spoke in heavily accented African English, but the American couple understood them with little difficulty. It is like the pidgin English spoken by the Nigerians. Michael is hoping in his heart that the captive Nuer soldiers will be accorded treatment according to the Geneva Convention and taken as war prisoners. He does not want to witness yet again another human massacre. He thanked God that his Indian wife did not watch how the jungle savages were massacred in cold blood. He knew that Christina would collapse if she witnessed such brutality before her naked eyes. The Dinkas bound the Nuer soldiers' hands and feet. They tore off their military uniforms and underwear, leaving them stark naked. Then they hung them upside down from the long trees. The Nuer soldiers now look like sheep being prepared for slaughtering and skinning. After that, the Dinkas brought heavy sticks and began to flog their sworn enemies. The cruel flogging is concentrated on the legs, backs, stomachs, and shoulders. The Dinkas avoided striking the heads of the Nuers because they did not want them to faint or die quickly. They want them to feel the pain as long as possible. Even the harshest interrogation method in the world may not be as cruel as the one that has been done by the Dinkas to their enemies the Nuers. They are acting as if they had been trained by the mafia in Italy or the terrorists of ISIS in Syria in how to torture their victims without killing them. Domak Get Nile is the only Nuer soldier who got shot in the head and instantly killed, and so suffered a relatively peaceful demise. The Nuer soldiers began to scream as loud as they could master by their mouths from the unbearable pain being inflicted on their naked bodies. Christina also began to cry with them. Michael tried to convince her to stop crying. He worried that her reaction may be interpreted by the Dinkas as she is being sympathetic to the Nuers. Nonetheless, she kept on crying and begging the executioners to stop beating those helpless African soldiers. No one of them bothered about her pleadings and tears and continued to flog the hanging bodies of the enemies until their black skins turned red. Their sticks became red, and their military uniforms and hands were smeared with the flooding drops of blood from the copiously bleeding skins of the Nuer soldiers. The cruel flogging went on until all the Nuers stopped crying and moaning and fell unconscious. The cruel executioners have also become tired and are soon replaced by another group of fresh Dinka soldiers who continue the flogging until their captives have become corpses. The American couple had never anticipated seeing one-day people get flogged to death in that brutal torture. After that, the ruthless Dinka soldiers shot the corpses in the heads to ensure that they were dead. The dead bodies are left hanging in the trees. Even Domak Get Nile has been hauled off the truck and hung along with his dead Nuer comrades. As if to satisfy a terrible itch, they flogged his corpse for some time and shot him once again in the head. The Dinkas also claim to be the direct descendants of the ancient Kemites, the great Egyptian pharaohs who built the pyramids. For an unknown reason, they said they too had lost their great Egyptian heritage and civilization and become what they became today, a nomadic people with no written language, no great heritage, no religion of their own, no culture, but the most backward and primitive African people. Some of them are still very primitive and run naked in the jungle. It seemed that every African group wanted to disassociate itself from its African roots and claim a connection with some ancient civilization. We had already seen the case of the African Americans in the States who claimed to be the true black Hebrew Israelites. Likewise, the black Arabs of North Sudan claim to be the direct descendants of the Middle Eastern Arabs. I know that the phrase black Arab is an oxymoron because no human being can be black and Arab at the same time. The Arab person is either white or reddish of a Semitic descent, while the black man is black and Hamitic. I think the cause of this irrational denial of someone's origin is something deeper than just their roots being backward and primitive. I believe it has something to do with the color and the looks. Many European tribes, especially the Germanic tribes, were backward and known as barbarians. Some were observed killing and eating Roman soldiers unlucky enough to be their captives. Some would go to war buck naked with just sandals on their feet and swords in their hands. Some were vandals and behaved like jungle people. Old Spain was named after them, Andalusia. Even the English verb vandalize, in the vernacular, is used to describe the act of a person who behaves like them. For a long time, many of those European tribes remained uncivilized and primitive barbarians until Christianity domesticated them and gave them religion and morals to live by. Nevertheless, no one among their descendants today disowned their roots, like the Germans, Norwegians, Hungarians, Spaniards, Franks, English, and Berbers. Michael could not comprehend the enmity and hatred between those two warring tribes, the Dinka and Nuer. Why do they hate each other? Why do they enjoy torturing and murdering one another? How and when does the feud start, and can it be concluded peacefully? Those questions cannot be answered even by the most educated members of those two tribes. The roots of the conflict between them go back hundreds of years. The Dinkas are the biggest tribe in South Sudan, followed by the Nuer and Shilluk. South Sudan is home to around 60 indigenous ethnic groups and 80 linguistic partitions, with a 2011 population estimation of around 11 million people. A spiritual leader rules each group or tribe, called the chief or the sultan. None of the tribes are agreeable to being ruled by someone from another tribe. This, in a nutshell, is the problem of the whole continent of Africa. It was converted overnight from a tribal system to that of sovereign countries. This Western imposition has caused numerous conflicts in South Sudan for people not ready for such change. The Dinkas are determined to rule other tribes by hook or by crook. Their argument is hinged on the fact that they have a numerical majority and are among the most powerful tribes. The Nuers revolted against them, and this led to a bloody civil war between the two tribes. It is no surprise that the newly minted state of the Democratic Republic of South Sudan collapsed in just a couple of years. With that collapse, all the big promises and hopes died. The promise to make South Sudan a secular and democratic country where all people can live together peacefully and be treated equally regardless of their gender, religion, and ethnic background is just a distant pipe dream. The hundreds of years-old tribal strife erupted as soon as the south of Sudan achieved independence from the north of Sudan, and it had been decreed as an independent African country by the United Nations on July 9, 2011. According to Human Rights Watch's report on the atrocities observed in the world's youngest country since President Salva Kiir, a Dinka accused his newer vice president, Riek Machar, of plotting a coup in December 2013. Catalogues crimes range from the ethnically motivated murder of civilians to gang rapes, and the mass destruction and looting of civilian property. Such acts, it says, have defined the conflict, which is estimated to have killed tens of thousands of people, driven 1.5 million southern Sudanese from their homes, and left almost 5 million in dire need of humanitarian assistance. South Sudan's death toll in this new war is unknown, but thousands of civilians have been killed, homes and markets burned, and bodies left to be eaten by birds and dogs, says the report of Human Rights Watch. Both sides in South Sudan's recent civil war have committed extraordinary acts of cruelty that amount to war crimes, and potentially crimes against humanity, according to the report. Chapter 50. The most brutal massacre ever committed in the south of Sudan. The American couple Michael and Christina have found themselves being caught up in a tribal deadly feud that they could not understand. When the Nuers massacred the savages of the Dinka, the two American lovers looked at them as ruthless tribal soldiers. And when the surrendered Nuer soldiers were flogged to death by the angry Dinka soldiers, they viewed them as cruel killers. In both cases, the two groups showed the sinful state of the unrepentant bereft of the human hearts. There is no significant difference between the Muslims who tortured and murdered in the name of their religion, and those South Sudanese Christians, who also tortured and murdered in the name of their tribes. Both groups are deadly tools in the hands of despotic rulers of the world, and the devil. See the Gospel of John 14, verse 30. The Bible said about both, their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths. And the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes, referring to the epistle of the Apostle Paul to the Romans chapter 3, verses 15 to 17. They are not different from the terrorists of the devil incarnate Khalid Mansour Satan, Al-Had, who murdered the two innocent nuns in cold blood, and brutally raped the 12-year-old daughter of the good old man. Even the virgin nun Patricia Akal, before her death, was raped by 3 of his evil black Arabs. At first, the Indian wife refused to go with the evil Dinka soldiers. She fell to the ground, announcing to her American husband that even if they must torture her to death, she is not going with them anywhere. Michael tried to convince her that they had no choice except to obey their orders and go with them, but he could not. 2 of the Dinka soldiers came, and literally dragged her up to their military truck. They have dragged her just like dragging the lifeless body of an animal. Michael attempts to stop them from abusing his wife, but his protests are met with combat boots which silence him, and pushed him back. When he fell to the ground, he likewise has been dragged by his feet, and flung into their truck. The Dinka soldiers have abused and ill-treated them worse than the relatively mild Nuer fighters. For a 6-hour-long trip, they are given neither water nor food. They are not engaged in any conversation. When Michael tried to talk to them in English, they hushed him and threatened to shoot and kill him if he opened his mouth again. Upon their arrival in the capital city of South Sudan, Juba, the American couple were treated as foreign spies and collaborators with their Nuer enemies and imprisoned along with other detained Nuers. The majority of the detainees are non-combatants. The holding facility is a huge car garage, housing military vehicles. There must be at least 250 prisoners there, with women, children, and old men among their number. The majority are young Nuer men. The Dinkas do not care to separate detained women from men, or imprison children from adults. If the young Nuer women escape being raped by their Dinka captors, they may not escape being raped by the Nuer men who are imprisoned with them in the same place. Michael has expected that many of the young girls are going to be raped at night by the men. Even children are at risk of gang rape. Therefore, the American husband is worried constantly about the safety of his beautiful Indian wife. How can he protect her from those Nuer men, if they come to rape her at night? He found himself in a hopeless situation, worse off than when he was left bound with hands and feet outside the jungle savages' camp. Christina shared the same fears and worries, fully expecting to be viciously attacked and gang-raped at night. She knew that her husband would be outnumbered and possibly killed if he tried to intervene in any sexual advances by those sexually frustrated Nuer males. Since she arrived in the Dinka detention, the Nuer men have been staring at her as if they were hungry beasts that spotted defenseless prey and paced around for the right time to come and attack her. The 2 detained Americans understood that they could do nothing in their tricky situation except pray and trust in God for another miraculous salvation. It was around 4 p.m. when Michael and Christina were thrown inside the holding facility of the ruthless Dinka soldiers. They have gone without food and water for the last 8 hours. It appeared that no one inside the garage had received any food or medical care of any sort. Some of the detainees are mortally wounded and their bodies are swollen and still bleeding. Children are surviving on the milk that they are suckling from the emaciated bodies of their hungry and thirsty mothers. When the sun went down, the garage turned into a huge dark tomb. There are no lights. The single door and 3 windows of the garage have been shut securely from without. The place has an extremely foul odor of human being sweat and bad breath. The American couple is feeling they may suffocate to death in such an unhealthy environment. There is no fresh air to inhale but filth and nauseating odor. The women and children began to weep. The women are crying from the fear of being raped and the children from everything else. Voices of crying old men can be heard over the wails. The miserable situation of the prisoners is impossible to describe in human terms. Even the Muslim terrorists might not be that evil by imprisoning men and women together and also small children, males and females in the same place. Michael embraced the body of his beloved wife and enveloped her like a hen trying to protect her brood from eagles overhead. His ears pricked when he heard the shouting of young girls calling for help. Michael knew why those young girls were screaming. He can do nothing to rescue them from their rapists. His main concern is to try to save his beloved Christina from gang rape. He determined in his heart he could allow his wife to be attacked and raped only over his dead body. Accordingly, in such an inconvenient situation, the American husband just wants to protect his Indian wife from any possible attack and rape. He anticipated that sooner or later one male or more men may come groping in the dark to rape his beautiful wife. Christina began to scream too, even though her husband was holding her between his long arms. Before Michael could determine why she was screaming, he heard a loud sound outside the garage. Light filtered in from the 3 windows being opened, and 3 snipers began to open fire on the crowd, killing them indiscriminately. The crowded garage became a killing field. People started to run everywhere and trampled on each other. Everyone is screaming, children, women, and men. The dark garage is pierced by the powder trails of the unceasing shots of the 3 Dinka snipers. Michael and Christina happened to be sitting at the other end of the garage. Many of the detainees took cover in the same section of the crowded detention. The mass of women and men crowding the corner made all movements impossible for the American couple. There are people stacked atop others in an absolute panic. The 3 snipers' firing is directed toward the corner, where the mass of detainees is concentrated. The foreign couple can hear the shouts of people as the bullets strike their bodies. The smell of cordite lingered in the air, laced with the game scent of blood and sprayed bodily fluids. Michael and Christina stopped praying, just waiting for the bullets to relieve them of their agony. They have never longed so much for death as at those difficult moments. The more the coming of their looming death is prolonged, the more they feel frightened and miserable. Both began to cry along with the diminishing number of newer survivors. While the snipers were firing, the big door of the garage opened, and some Dinka soldiers and policemen rushed in and began to open fire. Those new shooters concentrated their fire on the corner. Michael and Christina are buried underneath tens of bodies of dead and still living Nua men, women, and children. The crowded and frightened prisoners put so much pressure on that corner until the corrugated zinc-made wall collapsed outwards. It is as if the angel of God descended from the heavens and opened the gate of the bottomless pit. The extremely frightened prisoners have started to flee immediately for their lives, while the bullets are trailing them like deer fleeing from their hunters. Mothers left their children behind and fled for their lives. Even fathers abandoned their small sons and little daughters and escaped. Michael has a death grip on his wife and drags her when she cannot keep up. They just ran along with the other escapees into the streets and continued to run aimlessly. Many fell along the way, but they could not even afford a backward glance. The background bark of the machine guns kept them running to the point where they could not run anymore. After running for some time, the 2 American lovers fell on their knees, and prostrated in a dark alley. A few fleeing survivors have passed by them, and continued to flee for their lives. Only stray dogs continued hounding them with their incessant barking. There are no other people in sight except the 2 American escapees, who are lying on their stomachs like two corpses of murdered people.